Bizarre Reality Media. The reality we live in can be a very strange place. Most of the time, fact being stranger than fiction. How will we ever start to understand this reality we live in unless we question everything? Join me and a guest as we unravel the mysteries of this reality, one topic at a time. This is Inquiries of Reality with Shayn Jones. What is up, Inquirers, and welcome to the expanse of deep conversational exploration into the fringes of social norms. I'm the one they call Shane, aka the original Sasquatch, and today for you guys, we'll be delving back into the mysterious world of Sasquatch with Joey Vogt, an avid outdoorsman with first-hand encounters that will leave you questioning that branch snap around your campfire. From spine-chilling Bigfoot sightings to the intriguing spider crawl phenomenon, Joey shares his captivating experiences and insights. Whether you're a skeptic or a believer, this episode promises to ignite your curiosity and expand your understanding of the wilderness and its hidden secrets. But before we get into this fascinating conversation, just a couple of quick news and updates. First and foremost, there will be a lot of new structure changes coming to the show. As far as one, I'm going to try to cut down a bit on ad breaks and possibly even trying to cut those down a little bit more in the future, but we'll see how stuff goes. As we start going through time a bit, I'm going to try to shift it a little bit more where if you guys are more so supporting the Patreon and donating to the show, I'm going to start pulling some ad breaks a little bit more away from the show and just try to shift it over slowly that way. But for the time being, I'm going to try to group stuff together and make it so that the ad breaks aren't so interjecting in the conversation, make it a little bit easier to listen to. And also, speaking of making the show a little bit easier to listen to, instead of front-loading the front of the show with all the front-of-house stuff, I'm going to spread out a little bit so we can basically just get right into the show after I give you guys some news and updates about anything going on behind the scenes. So that'll make it a little bit faster going in. And also, as of right now, so that it gives me a little bit of time to catch up a little bit, any of the weeks that Bizarre Inquiries will be dropping, there will not be a second episode those weeks. Like I said, it'll just give me a little bit of time to catch up on some stuff behind the scenes, but also behind the scenes there's going to be a lot of new stuff going on as we go into this next upcoming year. I'm going to try to kick stuff a lot more into high gear, try to make it so I'm a lot more engaging with you guys. And also, speaking of being engaging with you guys, I'm going to be trying to put together a chat community again. Big difference, like I mentioned on the last few episodes versus now, is I'm going to try to make sure that I'm active on it continuously anytime I see anything going on in there. But the first step to trying to make that happen is to decide whether or not we're going to do it on Telegram or Discord. So if you guys don't mind going into the show description, there's a quick little survey. You guys don't even have to put your emails, put anything in. All it is just a 2-option question. All you guys have to do is click that. That's it. No effort. Takes you half a second. If you guys don't mind doing that, I would definitely appreciate it. And then we could figure out which place we should start working on this chat community. And also, if you feel like doing some surveys and you guys possibly want to win a free t-shirt of your choice, if you guys don't mind taking the time to fill out an 8-question survey of all of your guys' thoughts and opinions pertaining to the show, it is all going to go towards helping the show grow and improve, as I mentioned, going through this upcoming year. But the only way I'm going to be able to do that is if you guys don't mind voicing your thoughts and opinions on the show so that it can continue to grow and improve. And with that, of course, be able to bring on bigger and better guests for you guys, and also continuously build a community for all of you guys and actually get to know you guys personally, which is something that I've been lacking for a long time, but I definitely want to take that opportunity to do. And one last thing before we get into the show, if anybody is interested in catching the next live episode of Bizarre Inquiries, that'll be happening on January 8th over there on the Bizarre Reality Media YouTube channel at about 7:15 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, the usual time. And if anybody has any questions, clips, or articles that they would like to submit for that, just make sure you guys get it to us before that date. And if anyone is interested in being a guest on the show, sharing their experiences or encounters, or contacting me for any reason whatsoever, the best way to do so is through email, which is inquiriesofourrealitypodcast@outlook.com. Or you guys could always call or text me on the Bizarre Reality Media hotline, and you guys can do that 24/7. That number is 313-364-1551. And if you happen to miss that, it is available down in the show description. And with that, let's get into the show. Please welcome to the show, Joey Vogt, experiencer, who actually was connected by a friend of the show, John Reiners. Please welcome to the show, Joey Vogt. How's it going today?
Really good. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. Good to meet you.
Oh, yeah. And John, of course, is one of my personal favorite people to talk to. We always have some back and forth going behind the scenes and everything. So after having him on the show recently, he mentioned your name, of course, said that you had a lot of very fascinating experiences, not just pertaining to Bigfoot, but, of course, some other stuff, too. So I'm really looking forward to diving into some of your experiences, especially considering that you said that you haven't really been on too many podcasts. So for me, at least, those are always the absolute most fun because you get to really dive into some people's personal experiences, and people haven't really filtered them out too much yet if they haven't been on shows too much. So that's always fun, of course. So I guess for anybody that may not be familiar with you, who you are, before we start getting into some of your experiences, do you kind of want to give them a little bit of a background on who you are, where you come from, to kind of give them a little bit of a framework before we get into it?
Sure. Well, I'm 65 years old now, retired. I've spent all my life an avid backpacker and camper. Whenever I get a chance, I'm in the woods. And
good place to be.
Yeah, absolutely. Here in Oregon, there's plenty to explore. I used to consider myself a fishing addict. So that's one of the reasons John Reiners and I hit it off was that guy gets any time off at all. He's got a fishing pole in his hand.
Him and I go back and forth on that too. He's been on vacation the last couple weeks. It seems like he's kind of been popping back and forth, sending me a bunch of fishing pictures. So it seems like we all get along over fishing. That's never a bad thing.
The relationship he has with his dad is just remarkable, and he's well into his 80s. His dad's well into his 80s now, and he still gets him out there fishing, and I'm really proud of him for that. And the book, he wrote a book all about it, and I encourage people to check out John Reiners. All the books he's written, not on his relationship with his dad and fishing, but his Bigfoot. The books on Bigfoot are hard. It's a hard act to follow. It's some of the stories in the recent one, the quadrupedal Sasquatch is just, it's, I told him it was one of the most frightening books I've ever read. You know, for one thing, the encounters that the people he interviewed were absolutely legitimate. And I guess for someone who's experienced, something similar, reading through them, in a lot of ways, I feel lucky to just be sitting here in one piece to share the stories I have.
I mean, especially the spider crawl stuff. I mean, when I talked to him on the show, he's the only guy that's really written a book on that phenomenon. And it seems like it's one of those ones that within the last couple of years, it went from something that was completely obscure to something that people are really starting to take into consideration now. And I feel like his book was what brought a lot of validity to that because, not only was he trying to cover this really, really bizarre aspect of Sasquatch, but he was also trying to find scientific backing. And he was one of the people lucky enough to be able to have Jeff Meldrum make some comments, of course, on it in his book before he unfortunately passed away recently. So, if there's one person that could bring some scientific validity to people that are non-believers in the community, especially on something
as weird as a spider crawl, that would be the guy to do it. But, the more you kind of relate back to things, like it sounds really bizarre, but, as far as like an apex predator goes, like it would make sense that they would be intelligent enough to spider crawl because they're completely avoiding eyesight. Like it seems more logical that they would do things like that than it would be that they would just stand in the wide open where everybody can blatantly see them every single time. Like if you're going to creep up on a campfire, what's not a better way to do it than to army crawl up,
Absolutely. It added some light to the second encounter that I had in 1995. And John and I have agreed that was possibly what was happening, was that my Bigfoot went down on all fours as it left my camp. But, I'll explain further. But for the longest time, I couldn't really wrap my mind around what I was seeing with just my flashlight illuminating the eye shine. And after talking with John, him and I agreed, yeah, I think your guy got down on all fours and did the spider thing down the hill. So,
how low did yours end up getting? Because I know a lot of people like to say, oh, it may have been like a big cat or something like that. But a lot of the people that see these things, especially when you see them in the spider crawl pose, there's no mistaking. Like it's definitely not a cougar or anything like that. Like it is a full, humanoid figure that's on the ground crawling at you.
Oh my God, yeah, brother. And I told John that up until I had my first encounter, I was, I guess you'd say, a non-believer. I was 19 when I had my first encounter, and prior to that, I'd been in the woods plenty of times and heard plenty of Bigfoot stories. Saw the Patterson-Gimlin film, and was just doubtful because I'd never seen one, and seen everything else, bears and. I can't say I've ever seen a cougar. They've seen me, I'm sure, but just being out there and all the nights I'd spent, even at 19 years old, in the wild, and never seeing or hearing anything. But then I wasn't looking. I wasn't tuned in to some of the things that I may have missed and wrote it off as being just normal wildlife in the area. So who knows?
Oh, yeah, there's a lot of those cases where, people won't be a believer for a very long time, and then they'll end up having that experience where it's undeniable. Like, what you saw 100%, and then you start going back, and you're like, all right, I saw this bear like 5 years ago. Like, was it really a bear? Because it seemed like it was kind of off, and I wrote it off in my own head, or just anything weird. I mean, it's kind of like the paranormal, you have one experience, and then all of a sudden, all these bumps in the night that you noticed in the past, you're kind of like, all right, was there something a little bit more to that? Like, just even being in the woods and hearing something that sounds like a stick fall, normally you'd kind of move past that. But after you've been in an area where that there's Sasquatch, for example, it's like, all right, was somebody throwing a rock at me? Like, was it something a little bit more than what I thought it was? Like, there's always, the inevitable possibility that it may be like a squirrel dropping an acorn down a tree. But some of those clunks are hard enough that, it sounds like a rock hitting some tree bark.
Exactly. That's funny what you just said, and what my first experience. I'll explain further about how similar some of those things are to what I saw and witnessed. But I find it curious how many folks, that when they have their first encounter, one of the first comments they'll make is, "My mind was trying to wrap around what I was seeing. I couldn't make sense. My brain wouldn't operate in a way to let me acknowledge this is a Bigfoot in front of me, or had just run across the road," because we are conditioned as we grow up, I guess, lack of a better term, to, there are certain things that are in the forest, and Bigfoot is never one of them that is mentioned. And so after you see one or hear one, for a minute, your mind is still telling you, no, that couldn't be. What I just saw, it just can't be. That's incredible. How could that thing even exist? But it is what it is, right?
It's funny how a lot of the people that want to say, yeah, Bigfoot doesn't exist out in the woods, are a lot of the people that never actually go out in the woods. Because it seems like even a hunter, it doesn't matter how many years they've spent out in the woods, no matter how many times they've seen weird things out in the woods. Like, they always in the back of their mind, if somebody brings a good enough Sasquatch story, like the woodsmen are always going to say, yeah, there may be something to that. But it's always the people that have never actually been out in the woods that are always the hard no. Like, Sasquatch does not exist. There's no possibility of it. Nothing.
So just to kind of start things off a little bit, my next door neighbor, his also name is Joe, and he's in his 80s and retired heavy equipment operator, building logging roads and things of that nature all his life. And I told him about my podcast I had coming up with Bigfoot Society, and he related a story to me briefly about coming back onto a job site in the Coast Range of Oregon, south of Newport, southeast of Newport. And they had 55-gallon barrels of diesel lined up in front of a front loader, to use as they needed on the site. And he'd come to work one morning, and two of the barrels had been thrown over an 8-foot retainer fence that they'd had up on the edge of the gully to keep people or whatever, to contain the construction site. And he said for the longest time, him and his buddies tried to figure out what or how did those barrels end up in the gully completely full and sealed. I don't know what one of them would weigh if you do the math, but absolutely, something that he'd always feared. And just today, talking to him at the fence, having coffee, he told me, I really think that Bigfoot thing might actually be real. There's no other way to explain it, what happened that day to that oil barrel. I said, yeah, I can see a Bigfoot coming up and just chucking that thing.
Especially if you're working somewhere they don't actually want you to work. Like, there's endless cases of them completely like destroying like roadwork sites when they're trying to like make a new spot through the woods. I heard about a case like a couple of years ago where I think it was in like Maine or something like that. It was one of the somewhere over on the East Coast, but they were trying to make this highway through the woods, and they kept having a problem where every single night when they would leave, all the equipment would get like flipped over, destroyed, and it got to the point where after like a week of this happening, they basically just gave up on trying to build that road and just ended up rerouting it elsewhere. Like, this is something that if you look for it, there's a lot of cases of this.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's frightening to think to realize how strong they are, right? I mean, a few years ago, I guess I was watching a program. Maybe you saw it on TV, and I've been trying to find it again, but haven't had much success. It was a show about some Bigfoot encounters in Alaska, and the FBI had set these guys down. The witnesses had set them down with a lie detector test and a expert in eye movement and to create validity in what these folks were saying. And one of the stories was about two crabbers having lunch anchored in a bay or a cove up in Alaska somewhere, sitting on their boat eating their sandwiches, and 1,000-pound grizzly comes out onto the beach. They said, if I remember right, it was 50 or 100 feet from them. They were anchored pretty close to shore. And this grizzly's backing itself onto the beach and not paying any attention to them, but definitely centered on something that was still in the woods. And out of the woods comes a 10-foot Sasquatch. And this turned around and hightailed it down the length of the beach as this Bigfoot roared at it. Didn't pursue the bear. Just made a guttural roar and had its hands up in the air. And of course, these guys dropped their sandwiches, right? Probably something else too, and turned around and went back into the woods. And, the FBI, the lie detectors validated it. And the eye movement guy was on there saying, yeah, there's no reason not to believe this guy. I think he's telling the truth. But, anything backing down to 1,000-pound grizzly, you got to know that these things are incredibly strong.
Oh, yeah. I would say it's funny how even on a lot of these work sites, it's like they don't want to publicly make a statement about it or actually address this stuff, but they subconsciously will like make these addressings to these certain things. Like I think I was listening to Sasquatch Chronicles recently, and there was a line worker that was on, and he was talking about how they didn't like acknowledge the fact that he had a Sasquatch experience, but they started giving him like masks to wear on the back of their head so that it looked like there was eyes going back, and they said it was for other predators. But it's funny, like I said, these places don't want to actually acknowledge this stuff, but they acknowledge it in a roundabout way. It's kind of like DNR, you know, there's like a sighting that'll happen and they'll block off an area and say that there was like a bear sighting, for example, but they'll never say directly, even though you get them in the right spot, they'll start talking about it.
Right. Yeah, I truly believe that there's evidence out there that someone is, you know, just hasn't come forward with that probably would make us all shake in our shoes. For whatever reason, they don't want to share it publicly. I get it, you know, a fear of humiliation or interrogation, or for whatever reason, with all the sightings that have been reported, you know that there are some that just have gone without becoming public. And like I was telling John, I keep feeling like this will be the year. This will be the year that we can finally laugh at those that think we're crazy. So we'll see.
I'm hoping it ends up being one of those things that we're able to somewhat catch up with them before maybe there's not as many around, because it's one of those things that I feel like it's the numbers are starting to slowly dwindle down through the years as we're starting to kind of take up more area. Of course, you know, they're going to be around for a while still, but I'm hoping that we end up catching up with them before they may not be around anymore, or they get to a point where they're hiding so well because the numbers dwindle down to such a little amount that they're going to be absolutely impossible to find at that point. Because I mean, when it comes to the whole like Sasquatch thing, I don't think it's like some grand conspiracy to be able to hide all these things. I think it's a matter of these things are like the natives kind of refer to them. They're almost like a nomadic tribe. Like they're the extra tribe. Like there's something to them where, you know, you could try to section them off and say like, this is your spot of land, like you try to do with like Native American reservations. But if these things are nomadic and they live by a totally different set of rules, they're not going to stay in that specific spot. They're going to go off and do whatever they're going to do. So it's either like you have to acknowledge their existence or you have to try to keep them in these certain spots, but you can only do that for so much or for so long before people start actually having brush-in encounters with these things, which kind of gets into, I guess, somewhat of the national park conspiracy of, you know, are these things actually intended to be somewhat reservations or like areas that are dedicated because they know these things are in the areas, and then they just kind of double them out and say it's a public park because they can't, you know, tell the Sasquatch you stay in this area because they're nomadic. They're going to do whatever they're going to do. Not to mention, I'm sure that, you know, they may possibly understand us, but we, as far as we know, have no way of truly communicating with them to try to reiterate like a rule of saying you stay in this area.
That's a very relevant perspective. Yeah, I totally agree. Thing is about Oregon, you know, we've got the Willamette Valley, Portland, Eugene, Salem. You head east. I live in Lebanon. You head east of my house, and it just turns into a thick, old-growth forest for miles and miles and miles. And so as far as habitat, there's plenty here. And ironically, and I've been deep into all these wildernesses, Jefferson, Mount Hood. I've done the Pacific Crest Trail, the Oregon section, apart from the far southern Oregon section. Eagle Cap Wilderness, I've been all up in there. And like I said, I wasn't looking, but never saw anything. There's 25,000 black bears in Oregon. And all of the time that I've been in the forest camping and backpacking all my life, I've seen one black bear. So it's kind of strange that I've seen more Bigfoot than I have black bear here in Oregon. And the that I had, there was plenty of people around, and I was nowhere near being anywhere remote. So they are curious, incredibly intelligent. You know, why isn't there more pictures and video? Well, they are very good at avoiding contact with us unless they choose to do so. So it's no surprise to me that we don't have any, anything more reliable to validate their existence. It's just all about what they are. And like you said, we just don't understand what we're dealing with exactly. We can guess, but they know a lot more about we do than we do them. That's for sure, right?
I mean, even trying to catch up with them in general, especially being out in the woods, it's like that's their home. You know, there's a lot of animals they'll never catch up with just simply off the fact that they can smell you from miles away. And if you have anything like plastic or you're using like a camera or anything like that, they can hear the high pitched buzzing and all of that. So, you know, if you have Sasquatch and you add this intelligence factor to it, and then you add the fact of, you know, people wearing prominent cologne, like even if you go into the woods smelling like, using like deer urine, for example, I think these things are going to be intelligent enough to pick up that the smell is a little bit different than typical deer urine, and they're going to go completely the other direction. Actually, funny enough, I was listening to this psychology podcast the other day, and they were talking about this phenomenon where, I'm just kind of not necessarily correlating it with trauma, but just kind of using this as kind of an idea about how Sasquatch might think. But they were basically saying that if somebody's constantly under trauma and they're constantly under that fight or flight response, then they start living in that fight or flight response, and the part of their brain that goes more into like memory, quote, like intelligence as we would kind of deem it, starts to kind of shrink. And the vice versa happens, where if somebody's not under a lot of trauma, then the part of their brain that has to do with memory and everything starts to expand, and they're not constantly under that fight or flight. But connecting in with Sasquatch which was the point I was going to try to get to. You know, if you're an intelligent humanoid type beings, such as how we've kind of studied these things with psychology, and then you add in the factor that these things are essentially always in fight or flight because they always have to be watching their back in the woods, trying to keep away from everything. You know, their thinking is on a totally different level than ours, because essentially the way that their brain would have developed is that they're running off that fight or flight response all the time. So if you're constantly running off of that, any little cue in your environment, you're going to pick up on, whether it's somebody crunching from miles away, whether it's a smell, whether it's a weird buzzing, anything like that. Like, their brain has adapted to essentially, their main function is to pick up on that fight or flight response, and in order to react to whatever they're experiencing in their own environment. So, you know, they may not be intelligent in the way that we deem intelligence, because they don't have a need for that out in the woods, but they're way more intelligent than we are in the aspect of fight or flight and being fully aware of every single thing going on in their environments, which a lot of people definitely lack.
Yeah, I agree. You watch these Bigfoot shows, and there's, you know, cameramen and people traipsing through the woods and making all kinds of noise, and with their bright lights or infrared or whatever. That is, in my opinion, that's the last thing you want to do if you want to have an encounter. The both times that I had mine, I was just minding my own business, and they came to me. Apart from seeing one run across the road or, on a distant hillside or something like that, I do believe the best way to have an encounter, if anyone is interested, go out and camp. Don't make a bunch of noise. You know, they know you're there before you put that first tent stake in the ground, and just be cool. Don't target practice, you know.
They're curious. They got to have some way to entertain themselves. So if you give them something that they can peek up on, some type of a show, you know, they're going to come and see it, because, you know, I always throw the idea that it seems like, you know, people are whooping out in the woods and they're smacking trees. I'm not saying that they may fully function like any other type of ape, but if you look at like ape behavior, that seems to be more of like a dominant thing. So if you're trying to keep trying to get these things to come towards you, it seems like the last thing you'd want to do is be smacking on trees and be whooping into the woods. You know, the best way to draw in any prey is to sit, relax, and draw them in out of their curiosity.
Yeah. I don't know if my opinion on what I'm about to say is well accepted or not, but my belief is that even the wood knocks that they make are vocalizations. It's not a physical act of them grabbing a stick and hitting a tree. It's something that some guttural sound that they can actually make themselves. And we're out there with a baseball bat banging on the tree in response. Well, that might be the best way to imitate what you're hearing. But like I said, we don't know much about them and their capabilities. If and when we do find out what they're actually all about, I think everyone will be in awe of what we're dealing with.
I definitely agree with you there that I don't think that they're picking up logs and smacking trees. I've definitely been in the belief that they might be doing some type of like a popping with their mouth, or I was thinking maybe even doing like a smacking on like their chest or something like that. It seems like a lot of the time they seem to mimic sounds, like even weird sounds like car doors. People have had experiences with them mimicking owls, wolves, all that type of stuff off in the distance. Kind of funny to think about, but I'm kind of curious sometimes if the whole knock sound may not have been something that they ever inherently ever did, but more so it's something that people started doing around them. So they just started mimicking the sound and now we associate it with them. Like it seems like it's maybe it's something that they might do to kind of like hide underneath the radar of things. But, you know, if they're out there trying to communicate by making like owl sounds or doing these sounds, and it seems like they do knocks around people, I'm almost kind of curious if like subconsciously in the back of their minds, they might think that that's a sound that people do. So they're trying to hide themselves under the sounds of people. But, you know, we're making the sounds trying to interact back with them. Like it's like a loop, you know?
Hold on tight, guys. We'll be right back after this brief commercial break. And now back to the show.
I also believe that, like, to elaborate on what you just said, that they're capable of imitating sounds to attract game, just like hunters would use an elk call or a deer call or turkey call. That they're able to, you see, you want that deer as close as you can, get as close as you can to it before you leap out of the bushes and grab it. And I think these things, can actually probably do it better than any way we have in our grasp to bring game in. And that would be important to them that they eat. So that might be something to consider too.
I'm glad that you mentioned that because as you were saying that, I was kind of thinking that maybe it might be something that they intend to use to draw in some source of food. So I was trying to think about something that kind of sounds like it might be somewhat related to that sound. And it seems like maybe like rack knocking, like when you got two bucks or something fighting and their racks are starting to hit, people use that rack sound in order to draw in deer too. It almost kind of seems like maybe it's like an imitation, maybe of like two racks hitting, like that kind of a sound.
Definitely. Yes.
Because then, I mean, we definitely already know that these things end up going after deer. You end up finding the deer that are ripped in half, put up trees and stuff. So, I mean, maybe they're actually just sitting there and trying to call in deer. I mean, that would actually make sense.
I agree. And, I was thinking the other day, an 800-pound Sasquatch commenting or messaging with John, they're going to need 10,000 calories a day to sustain that kind of metabolism, unless they are able to slow that metabolism with rest or inactivity. You and I, we need 2,000 a day or 3 or whatever. These things can't survive on berries and skunk cabbage. They're going to have. I'm sure they're meat eaters. And even a cougar, they'll eat a deer a week here in Oregon. On average, they say a cougar will kill a deer a week, and they don't like eating spoiled meat. And I'm thinking that why would a Bigfoot, prefer anything less than the precious food that it could attain? So, and John and I were both thinking, wouldn't that be amazing if we got a video of a Sasquatch chasing down an animal and making a kill? Now that would be incredible.
Yeah, that would be the killer shot right there. Is my assumption is that these things end up living in like little tribes or like groups. So, roughly guessing probably like 4 to 6 per group, just a rough estimate. So if you got like 4 to 6 per group that you're trying to feed, essentially at that point, I think you have to take out about a deer a day to be able to split up that meat. So, a tribe of Sasquatch is probably taking out probably like 7 to 10 deer a week, I'd assume.
Sure. And I'm sure they have a pack mentality and hunt in groups to flush game out with decoys standing or hiding, waiting in game trails or whatever to ambush the game successfully. Who knows? But I don't see just one Sasquatch going out by himself and trying to chase down a deer. I think there's the intellectuality that we all assume that they have would lend to them being, kind of a group effort, family unit, securing food whenever.
It seems like a lot of the way they do things, and I've talked about this a bunch of times on the show, it seems to be somewhat like militaristic. So I'm assuming that not only do they hunt militaristically, but they also kind of creep up on people almost like how a military group would too. So, I don't know if it's something that they've subconsciously learned through the years, or, maybe it just honestly marks the intelligence level of these things. But, my assumption is, if they're trying to take out a deer, they're fast. I don't know if they're fast enough to take down a deer like that in the woods. So the best assumption would be that they probably do something where they kind of push them out and then they stay by a wall on the other side and essentially just ambush these things as they got one pushing it through the woods.
Yeah. Yeah, I've had several people will attest or claim that, if you see one or hear one, know that they aren't alone, that there's one behind you and, one off to your right, that rarely they would travel independently. And that would probably be the reason, I would assume, that if they came across game, it would be, 3-on-1, 4-on-1. And the importance of securing that kill is paramount to their survival. So that I think we can all agree that they are into the group effort kind of thing, so to speak.
I mean, even for the sake of fishing too, and I know this isn't a phenomenon that gets talked about too much, even though there's a lot of encounters of fishermen, of course, seeing these things. I think John actually said that he's currently trying to work on a book collecting encounters of people actually seeing Sasquatch, like go into water and try to fish or look for crawfish and stuff. But, if they were, for example, trying to collect fish, I think one of the best ways to do it, especially if they weren't actually using tools, maybe even purposely that they're not using tools, if you had like a river or a stream and you guys just end up making a straight line of like 5 or 6 across, any fish that comes down that creek, at some point, one of you guys is going to be able to grab it. So honestly, team effort, probably even the best way to even be able to catch things in the water for these things.
Yeah, agreed. I'm excited about that. The current book that John is writing, he contacted me today to let me know that the first chapter is about the encounter I had in 1995. He's sending me a hard copy to review and critique in the mail. He's sending it tomorrow. So I'm excited to see what he has to say about what I saw in 1995. But after I tell you about that, it's there's no doubt in my mind that they're completely capable of swimming or traversing bodies of water, no problem.
John actually ended up asking me if I knew anybody that ended up having an encounter like this. And unfortunately, I've been trying to find this person for a while. So sorry if you're a listener out there that actually remembers the episode. But I had a listener that came on that was talking about them. They're out fishing and they basically saw something in the water moving around. And they ended up realizing that it was a Sasquatch. And he was diving down and picking up what appeared to be crawfish. So unfortunately, I was able to get it to John where he can include it in the book. But, this is something that it's one of those things that people don't usually talk about it, but as soon as you say, hey, have you ever seen a Sasquatch in water? All of a sudden people are like, yeah, I'm pretty sure I saw one trying to like dive for fish, or I saw one like diving for this. Like all these weird little connections that you don't actually think about, but later on you realize that it's like a crucial detail and it actually fits into how these things are able to sustain themselves in the environment, especially if they're not just trying to look for game on land, but they're catching stuff in the water. Like that just brings even more validity into the fact that these things could be easily able to live in any of these vast areas in the woods. Because of course you got to have multiple food sources. These things got to be omnivores to some extent.
Yeah, my podcast with Jeremiah, couple days after he had made it public, there was a comment on their fellow that lives close to me up near Sweet Home, and was bank fishing at Green Peter Reservoir on a rainy. The reservoir had already been drawn down for the winter, and it was raining, he said. And he saw a doe and a yearling get into the water to swim across the reservoir a couple hundred yards downshore from him. And it got close to the far shore. And he said he saw a Sasquatch come out of the woods, dive into the water, swim underwater. He didn't. once it entered the water, it went underwater and swam, and suddenly the doe disappeared. He pulled it, what he thinks, pulled it underwater and drowned it. The yearling swam off to the shore, and by the time the Sasquatch came up for air, it had gone around the corner. He just saw it coming up out of the water, dragging this doe behind it, which just made me just shiver in my boots. So I wanted to contact him for John's sake. And when I went back to read the comment again, he had deleted it. So he made his encounter public and realized he didn't want any attention, or for whatever reason, if it was true or not, just the thought of that made, I was visualizing it thinking, Jesus, what the hell? You know,
Man, I really hope that was true, because, I mean, that just shows how strong these things are. Because, I mean, look at some of these guys in the military that end up doing, like, some of the SEAL training, for example. And if they have really, really baggy clothes on and it starts to get wet, it weighs them down. They're unable to swim. I mean, if these things have that much mass amount of hair on them, they're able to swim, and not only swim, but be able to grab deer and pull them out of the water. Like, honest, that shows the true strength of these things. And even going back a little bit earlier, I looked up how much a typical 55-gallon oil barrel weighs, and that's 300 pounds. So, I mean, what, 2 or 3 people normally lifting a 300-pound barrel, and people are still going to struggle? I'm sure these things are strong enough that it probably just picked up that 300-pound barrel and chucked it down that hill, no problem. Especially if it can even just simply swim in the water with that much hair. Like, that's got to be a lot of extra weight.
And to stay submerged for that long. He didn't clarify on how long it actually was underwater, but you know, you can imagine that maybe the lung capacity of these things, maybe they can sit on the bottom of the lake with a rock in their lap and collect as much food as they need. I mean, there's got to be some way that makes these makes Bigfoot extraordinarily capable in superhuman, you know, ways to secure their food needs.
I mean, just looking at their vocalizations, I mean, we can already tell that they have some pretty massive lung capacity. So, I mean, add that on top of being able to hold their breath. And if they've been training to do that for generations, like, I forgot exactly where I was at. I think it's in Indonesia. There's a specific village where the people will, like, do this weird thing where they will, like, cut their eardrums so they're able to stay underwater longer without the pressure hitting them. And then they build up to the point where they can hold their breath for, like, a half hour straight. So, you know, if Sasquatch has been doing this for generations and generations, like, who knows what possibility their lung capacity could be at. And even connecting in with another weird story, I don't know if you dive too much into like the Alamasty stuff in Russia, but there's the whole story of like Zora of Abkhazia, and there's the whole thing with her where people were like reproducing with her, and they were humans, of course, trying to reproduce with the Sasquatch woman. And one of the first things she did with the babies was she'd take them and try to put them down in the water, and people kind of theorized that maybe it's like water, like cold conditioning training, but you know, maybe it's a double out thing that they start this aquatic training at a young age, and it's something that, you know, looking at it from a different lens and perspective, like maybe it doubles out as two things. It builds up a cold tolerance for them, and at a very young age it starts building up to have a big huge lung capacity.
Agreed. You know, even humans are capable of assimilation and compensation for conditions over time that you know, I've always admired these polar bear swimming people, you know, and there's no way I'm jumping into the river on January 1st naked, but a lot of them hang out in water like it's a, you know, a hot tub. So it's curious to think of what they're capable of.
Oh yeah. So I guess before we we go too far off, of course, you've made a few reference to some of your Sasquatch experiences, and of course I want to be able to cover some of your Sasquatch stuff, and you said you have some other weird stuff such as UFOs and everything. So I'd like to be able to dive into some of your Sasquatch experiences, and then be able to dive into some of your UFO stuff too.
Yeah, for sure. I will try to keep it short and sweet. There's a list here, and I don't want to keep you up all night, but I did want to cover the two Bigfoot encounters that I had. So the first one was in 1979. I was at Silver Creek Falls State Park here in Oregon. It's up a little northeast of Silverton, Oregon. A very popular area, beautiful waterfalls there. Maybe the the prettiest place in Oregon as far as if you want to see some waterfalls. And there's hiking trails all through there. If you ever get out to Oregon, I highly recommend that you visit Silver Creek Falls State Park. Every year on Labor Day weekend, my church held a family camp at the YMCA complex there within the park boundaries. And, there's 150, 200 people that would attend. There was a community center there where we would all meet to have meals and celebrate and worship. And then two or three different cabin complexes on the grounds within a couple 100 yards of the community hall. My friend Dave was with me. I was 19, Dave was 17, and we got there a day late. I had to work on Friday, so we went up Saturday morning and ran into my pastor, Pastor Chereau, and he informed us that all of the creekside cabin units had been taken, were occupied, and we were welcome to take up residence in a cabin on the hillside unit, which is, as it's labeled, on a hillside, not within view of the community center, down a short little dirt road around the corner from the community center. There was 5 or 6 screen-walled cabins there on the hillside complex. No one was using any of them, so Dave and I thought that was cool. We got this whole place to ourselves. We celebrated with everyone there and went down to pick out a cabin at about 9 or 10 o'clock that evening. It was already dark, of course. Warm night, no rain, which is not typical of Oregon, even on Labor Day. But anyway, we picked a cabin out halfway up the hill. Like I said, it was hard wall around the bottom of the cabin that had a screen enclosure from about 4 feet up the wall all the way around to the ceiling, and bunk beds in the cabin. So him and I picked out a bunk on each side of the cabin, the top bunk, and put our sleeping bags out and continued. We went down onto the floor and we played cards for a while. It was probably midnight or close to 1 before we jumped into our bunks and went to sleep. So, which is what we did. And it gets pretty light pretty early that time of year still. I'd guess it was around 5 or 5:30 in the morning. I woke up and I remember woke up laying on my back and wondering why I was awake, for one thing, and laying there just kind of trying to wake up a little bit. And I hear what I thought was a pine cone or something fall onto the tin roof of the cabin on Dave's side of the cabin and roll down the roof and onto the ground outside the cabin. And I figured there's a squirrel or a bluebird or something, blue jay, up there getting some breakfast. Didn't think anything of it. And a few seconds passed, and then I hear 2 more things hit the roof, and I'm realizing those aren't pine cones. Those are rocks or pebbles. First one hits and starts to roll, then before it falls off the roof, another one hits the roof and rolls down and plops onto the ground. And I'm immediately thinking, somebody's throwing rocks on our roof, playing a prank on us. I had a friend there in camp named Kelly. It was in my youth group. And I thought, well, I wouldn't put it past him to come down here and mess with us, which still seemed kind of odd because the time of day. So I jump out of my bunk and I go over to Dave's bunk and I have my arms and elbows up on his bunk. He's still asleep. And I'm peering outside because the rocks had fallen on his side of the roof. I'm peering outside and I could just make out definition of the old growth fir trees outside the cabin. There was kind of a clearing area that outside the cabin, in between the cabins, that I could see pretty good now. It was starting to get a little bit lighter. And all of a sudden, first I hear and then I see what we later figured out was a 16-pound, pretty round rock sizzling through the air and smashing into an old growth fruit tray about 30 feet out from the cabin and about 30 feet up the tree, and just exploding the bark on the tree and falling to the ground. It was just incredible. And my mind is telling me, Shayn, it was telling me somebody's got a catapult up on top. I know that's crazy. That was what my mind was trying to make sense. Somebody's got a catapult up on the hill chucking rocks at us. Nothing can throw a rock that size. I didn't know how big it was at that time, but I could tell it was a good sized rock. So I reacted to that, and Dave wakes up and he's like, "What's going on?" And I explained to him, somebody's messing with us, bro. So I just saw this rock hit this tree out here and blah, blah, blah. And we're real quiet for a minute looking out there. And down the hill comes another rock rolling this time. And it's maybe the size of a bowling ball or a basketball, a little smaller than a basketball. Cha-chunk, 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 down past the cabin. Not near the cabin, but right out in the clearing and down past, and hits a tree or whatever down below us. And before I can say anything, my incredibly brave friend Dave, who weighed 120 pounds soaking wet, jumps out of his sleeping bag. He's in his undershorts, no shoes, no socks, no shirt on, and goes screaming out the screen door, and starts running up the hill towards whatever it is, that the source of whatever it is that we're seeing. Above the cabin, about 100 feet, the clearing turned into old growth fir trees and big old rhododendron bushes. There was a trail up past that, but that was as far as the clearing went. So Dave goes running up there, and he gets into the brush and out of sight from me. And I've gone over to the front of the cabin, and I'm peering out through the screen door, because guess what? I'm not going up there. I had no interest in going. He did it so quickly I couldn't really react. That was the excuse I gave him. I'll stay here and hold down the fort. So I'm peering out the screen, and he's up in the bushes going, hey, or whatever. I don't know exactly what he was saying, but trying to figure out what human was doing this, right? That's still our conclusion, that there's somebody messing with us. And I'm peering out, and off to the right of Dave, something catches my attention, and I look to the right of him about 50 feet, and out from behind one of the bigger rhododendron bushes stands the first Sasquatch I've ever seen in my life. This giant beast stands up. Jeremiah asked me, how big was it? I don't know, 8, 10 feet. It was bigger than the rhodey bush. And it stands up, and it's looking right at me. I can just, with the light available, I could just see the outline of him. Incredibly broad. How broad, I don't really know, brother, but this thing was massive. My heart is, my adrenaline in my, I'm immediately having this adrenaline rush. I'm frozen in terror. And before I can do anything, I couldn't even muster a warning to my friend. The Bigfoot puts his arm out and pushes down this roadie, and with his right leg steps over the bush and brings his other leg over and stands up straight. Now he's facing away from me, or actually I could see a side view of him now, and takes a couple steps and disappears into the woods. And then here comes Dave. He comes back down the trail, just kind of walking, and I still haven't said anything. He came around and came through the screen door, and I grabbed him by the shoulders and told him, dude, you wouldn't believe what I just saw. I explained to him, and I told him, we need to get out of here. We have got to leave. So he didn't even question it. We just grabbed what we could, what we thought we had everything, and I had an old Subaru, and we got in my car and went directly to the community center to be around people. I didn't want to be there any longer. Neither did Dave.
Yeah, I don't blame you.
I felt, well, I didn't know, what they were capable of. But the more I think about it, the premeditated cunning and intelligence of these things. I mean, it was standing there probably staring at me right through that screen. It could have at any moment just punched right through it and grabbed me. But instead it decided to grab a couple pebbles and mess with me by throwing these things onto the roof. That to me is just like chillingly brilliant. So we get to the community hall, and the cooks are already in there preparing breakfast for everyone. And we sat and waited maybe another hour. And the first person to come through the door was my pastor. And we immediately told him what we'd experienced. And he was kind of like, yeah, okay, right. So down a little bit now that we talked to him about it, and we were all in one piece. And later in the morning, David realized that, for one thing, we weren't going to spend the next night there. For sure. I didn't want to leave, really. But we talked the pastor into going back with us. David left his jacket there on the porch of the cabin. So we went back there. He jumped in my car, the pastor and Dave and I. We drove back over to the cabin and walked up to the cabin cautiously and collected the rock that had been thrown. And pastor's got it in his hands, and he's, testing. He's like, that is a good sized rock, and showed him where it had hit the tree. And it had been thrown with such force that it broke through the inner bark of this fir tree and just splintered it. I mean, like a cannonball.
Even just taking like a softball size rock, like just a person personally, like just take a softball size rock and try to throw it and feel how much like force and how much you actually feel like you're about to throw your arm out, and then try to project it to something bigger like that. Like, people hear these stories and be like, oh yeah, a person could totally throw a rock like that. But if you actually try to do it yourself, you realize that like it's a lot harder than it seems. Like I said, even a softball sized rock, like you got to really wallop that thing, and you're probably going to throw your arm out in the process of it, and you're still not going to make damage like that on a tree.
Yeah, we jokingly tried to toss it ourselves, later that day, and it went like 30 feet. An Olympic shot put is 16 pounds, and the world record's 72 feet or whatever. This thing was thrown absolutely like a rocket, without any Kentucky windage, and hit that tree like a fastball. So
I'm still convinced that these things use rocks for hunting. Because, if they can throw a rock like that, imagine like they're in like a clearing and a deer runs past. Like, I think these things are precise enough that they could probably take out a deer by hitting it in the head if they really needed to.
That I had never really thought about that, but you're absolutely right. Because this thing could have just as well thrown that rock through the screen of that cabin. Which I was thankful for.
Shows even more intelligence. This is something that I've thrown a few times, is that, when they're messing with people like this, they're throwing rocks. Like, I don't think they have any real intention to hit you. Like, they're actually just trying to scare you away, or maybe that's even why some people actually have these sighting experiences after they have rock throwing, is because it's not a matter of them trying to hurt you, but they're trying to scare you enough to leave the area. Because even on the flip side, if they actually ever end up hurting somebody or charging through a screen door or doing anything like that, I'm sure these things are smart enough to know that if anything like that happens, it's going to draw more people to the area. So I think they're smart enough to not go that far, because they know that they're just going to end up making it worse for themselves. So they just try to do any little precise thing they can do to get you out of the area without actually escalating to a point where they're going to draw too much attention to themselves.
Yeah, if it hadn't been for Dave, charging up the hill to explore what was going on, I think our Bigfoot would have stayed put or just disappeared back into the forest. It definitely knew that it had woke us up and that we were paying attention to what was going on by the way we were reacting. But if he hadn't done that, we would have probably left that morning really wondering what threw that rock. I would have never concluded it was a Bigfoot. I'd never seen one before that day. And the moment that I saw it, like I said, my mind was still trying to figure out what I was looking at. You know, I tried to tell myself it was a bear, but this bear's 8 feet tall or bigger, and they don't have 3 foot, 4 foot long arms and just step over bushes and run off like that. And they don't throw rocks, so.
Inquiries of Our Reality will be right back after this brief commercial break, so stay tuned. And now back to the show.
This is going to sound
So anyway-
like kind of a bizarre question. Unfortunately, I've never been one of the people that's actually had the opportunity to have like a first hands-on, like, here's a Sasquatch right in front of me encounter. But coming from somebody that's been in that situation, of course, the brain tries to rationalize that it's anything other than what you obviously assume that it is. But when you're like in that moment and you're actually seeing this, have you noticed like a bit of a phenomenon where your brain almost tries to like warp what you're seeing, where like you're clearly seeing a bear, but like your brain will literally try to warp it to show you like a bear, for example? Kind of a bizarre question, but high moments of fear. Like I feel like your brain will literally try to cover up what you're seeing.
Yeah, that's very, very, very close to what happened, because it stood up and I saw the dark outline. He's facing me. And for a fraction of a second, I'm thinking, bear. And I almost wanted to scream it to Dave, bear. And then I noticed how broad it was. And before I could even let that soak in, I see this arm come over the bush. It's clearly the light green of the bush and this dark, basically black looking arm pushing this bush down like it's nothing. And those roadies are quite stout, and pushing it down to the ground and stepping over it so quietly too. Dave later told me I didn't hear anything. I said it wasn't really making much noise. And when it got all the way on the other side of the bush, it didn't really, I don't know if it noticed me looking at it. I didn't say anything or scream or yell, or I just was frozen in awe, or fear, whatever. And then I saw the side view of him, and it didn't run off. It just took a few steps and it was gone, into the woods. And you don't have to go far back into the woods to disappear here in Oregon. And that's exactly what it did. Anyway, so Pastor's got this rock in his hand, and he's testing the weight of it and walking around looking, and there weren't any tracks to find. The ground, the forest floor there is mostly fir needle, and it's real dry time of the year, so there weren't any impressions that we could find. We walked up the hill to where the bush was, and I bravely went behind it where I thought I saw him standing or stand up from. Couldn't find anything there, and Dave's right beside me looking. Pastor had gone a few yards ahead of us and up into the forest, and we hear him say, "Hey guys, come here." So we join him, and he's got the rock in his hand, and he says, "Check this out." And he takes the rock and puts it down into a hole in the ground that fits exactly where this rock had come from. The watermark on the rock, it was about half exposed, I guess. And the watermark, the top of the rock was a light color, and the bottom was soiled, darker, moist, soiled. And it fit perfectly into there. And he made the comment, whatever pulled this out of the ground didn't have to try very hard. They just grabbed it and pulled it out. There wasn't any shovel marks or much exertion to get this thing out. They just plucked it out. And now my pastor is really like kind of freaking out. And he's like, "Well, I think we've seen enough." Back down to the car. We stayed in another cabin that night so we could play the football game on Sunday with everybody. And I really didn't think about it much after that. There was safety in numbers, and I don't even remember Pastor telling us not to share the story, but I don't believe we did. Maybe I didn't want to scare anybody. There were a lot of kids there. And like I said, we were still in one piece. I kept thinking, like I said, this Bigfoot that I witnessed was not aggressive. It was a real trickster and loved to play pranks, but that was as far as that went. I wasn't harmed. Dave wasn't harmed. It could have grabbed Dave, right? It could have just followed him up the little trail he went and grabbed him. None of that happened. And for whatever reason, though, that was the last family camp I attended at Silver Creek Falls. They continue to go up there now. But of course, I got into college after that, and I was actually attending a different church in the hometown of the college I was attending. So that might have been part of the reason. But no, I never had any interest in going back to Hillside cabin complex. I'll tell you that much. My friend Dave, unfortunately, he passed away way too young. He was just turned 50, and I still miss him, but he kept that rock as a souvenir, and he inherited a house after his parents died in a plane crash, and used it as a doorstop. And I'd go to visit, and we'd always, talk about it a little bit more and hand the rock back to each other just so we could remember how heavy that sucker was. And that was the most impressive thing to Dave. He was always a little jealous. He didn't get to see what had thrown it, but he always reminded me of the damage that the rock did to the tree, and that could have been us, So, yeah, that was an incredible experience for both of us, for sure.
I mean, just to go back into what we were kind of mentioning about the intelligence factor of these things, I mean, that also really shows the intelligence factor of these things that, they can whip a rock at a tree purposefully to scare somebody, but not bring it any further than that. Because, I mean, honestly, like, how else would you end up explaining that? Like, nobody's bringing a catapult out in the woods, nothing like that. Like, what not a perfect way to just straight up, like, horrify somebody. I mean, also, too, just showing your apex predator abilities in the area, too. Like, I'm surprised that you guys didn't get hit with infrasound.
Yeah, none of that. Didn't experience any of that. Or maybe that's why I couldn't move, but I think it was mostly just out of amazement and denial, that I was seeing what I was seeing. Like, that can't be a Bigfoot. Yeah, it's a Bigfoot.
And also, too, I want to make sure that we had time to be able to touch this encounter, too, because this one is always one of the most fascinating to me. You mentioned also that you had a spider crawl experience, and that's how you ended up connecting with John. I'd love to dive into your spider crawl experience, because anybody that's willing to share these, like, they're absolutely fascinating.
Sure. So the next, I continued to camp and backpack after that with not even a second thought about a fear of Bigfoot or anything, or bears. I've never packed a gun with me. I never felt I had reason to. I've seen plenty of wildlife, but never had a close encounter really, out of stupidity or bravery. I don't know which, but I was a little bit of a purist as far as that goes. Not against people that do carry. And now in Oregon, it's probably wise. The cougar population is just skyrocketed over the last few years. So anyway, my second experience was in 1995 on the 2nd of July on a little island called Piety Island on Detroit Lake, which is in the Santiam Canyon near the town of Detroit here in Oregon. Piety Island is about a mile long, possibly half-mile wide, not too big. It rises up about 200, 300 feet from lake level. A real nice boat camp on the east end of Piety Island, and I had been going there for a few years. My birthday is on the 4th of July, and I had been camping there for a few years in a row before my encounter there with friends on our jet skis. We'd tow rubber boats with our camping gear out to the island and party and barbecue and just enjoy the friendship with each other, fellowship with each other for 2 or 3 nights every year. We always went early because Detroit Lake does fireworks over the lake on the 3rd of July. So we were there on the 2nd, had dinner down on the beach. Most of the folks were camped down on the beach. My friend Dave and I and his girlfriend Nancy had chose a camp into the woods a little bit. It was still an established campsite, had a picnic table and a fire ring, just so we could have a little bit of privacy and get away from the wind that usually kicked up there in the afternoon. Anyway, we partied down on the beach and had a great time. And about 10, 11 o'clock, we all headed back up to our campsite, said goodnight to everyone. Nancy and Steve immediately went to bed in their tent. I had a tent maybe about 20 or 30 feet from them set up. And also along with us was my friend Steve's dog, Susha. She was a big old 100-pound female chocolate lab. And I'll add this right now. This dog, it was bittersweet to take her camping. She loved to camp and swim, but she did not like deer. And if there was a deer within a quarter mile of camp, she'd get wind of it and take off, and we wouldn't see her for an hour. We'd hear her barking and chasing it, and then she'd come back all happy. But and there were deer on the island, so that was always, I'm not a fan of harassing wildlife in any way, and I always felt sorry for the deer being chased. So anyway, they go to bed, and I'm at the fire pit. I'd laid out my bed or my camp pad to lay on the ground by the fire. It was slowly dying. I'd added a little wood to it to keep it going long enough to wind down. Susha is laying in at my side, just kind of chilling out. I decided I didn't want to put any more wood on the fire. It's dying down, and it's quite smoky now. No flames, but the smoke is rising. There's no wind. It's super quiet, calm night. And thinking it's about time for bed. And suddenly Susha sits up, makes a little bit of a growl. And I'm looking at her, and she's staring out of camp and kind of uphill from me a little bit. And she's locked on to something. And right after I notice her doing that, I hear a large stick crack. Not like a twig, but like a good size, if I had to, I never found the stick, but I would have guessed it was, 3 or 4 inch round fir bough that had been snapped. A real low, sound snap, but loud. And now she's really on alert. She's standing up, not barking or anything, but standing up. The thing is, if it was a deer, she'd have been out after it immediately before the stick broke or anything. She would have taken out after it. So she's just standing there, and she's whimpering a little bit, like she's hurt. Not loud, but there's this little whimper, and I'm like, I've never heard that from her either. And so I get out my keychain, and I have a little pen light on it, the kind that you have to screw tight to get the light to come on. And the battery's real crappy in it, but it's still giving off a little light. And I get up on my knees, and I'm shining my light up the hill, looking around as best I can with this thing. Susha's still standing by me. And I'm looking at, ground level pretty much to see if it's a deer, and sometimes even elk swim out there to the island. And that was what I was thinking next. Well, a big elk could break a stick that big. And something catches my eyes, Shane. And my light goes from ground level up the side of the biggest tree next to camp, which is about 10 feet on the other side of my fire ring. Through the smoke of the fire, I'm shining my light. And I see one eye peering out from me from behind this tree. That's all I can see due to the light, and it's pitch dark. I see this eye shining at me, and John was asking me what color it was. I think it was yellow or reddish yellow, but it's big. And I'm still thinking elk, but this is 8-10 feet up the side of the tree. This old growth fir tree that's, 3 feet wide. And so it's blinking. The eye is blinking at me. And now I'm discounting everything and I'm thinking about Bigfoot a little bit, but still not. And then the next thing I'm thinking is it could be an owl, like grabbing onto the bar. I don't know. Just trying to make sense of it. So I stand up and brave or stupid, like I say, I put my arm straight out with my little light and I step right over the fire ring, right through the smoke, right towards this thing, marching towards it. I take about a step on the other side of the fire ring and it disappears behind the tree. And out from the other side of the tree, now I realized it's standing in full view of me and I see both eyes staring at me. And I can see the outline of the second Sasquatch I've ever seen in my life. This massive beast just standing there. So its right arm is still partially behind the tree, but the rest of its body is completely exposed. And I can even see, a little bit of detail in the body size and the width of its head perfectly with this light, although as crappy as it was. And I'm, again, frozen in fear, just shining my light at it. And it's not making any noise. The other thing, I never smelled anything. People say they smell like dead fish and dogs. I never smelled a thing. I don't know if the wind was just right or what, but
I think that's a pheromone thing. At least from some of the experiences that I've kind of talked to with people, it seems like they purposely are able to like give that pheromone off when they want to, and they can not stink when they don't want to also. So I've heard of a bunch of people that have gotten that really, really heavy funk smell. That's one of my few experiences, is actually getting that really, really heavy, thick musk smell. But then other experiences like yours, you'll be face to face with these things and not pick up on anything. Like, I'm assuming a lot of animals in the animal kingdom, they can probably purposely give off this pheromone.
Yeah, that's very likely. Remember one time fishing on top of a beaver dam. I'd stepped up on a beaver dam and they did not appreciate me standing on the beaver dam fishing. And suddenly there was an overwhelming musky smell I couldn't stand emanating from this beaver dam, and I had to get off of it. So they did their job. Okay, so I got my light on this Bigfoot and he's looking at me. And I'm standing my ground with my light, maybe 5-10 seconds, just looking at each other, and I'm breathing heavily and shaky. And suddenly he goes right down to the ground and puts his hands out in front of him on the ground. I can't really see the detail of him, except I could see his arms were extended, and he's squatting down like he's going to take a dump with his hands right on the ground in front of me. And now we're eye level. It's squatted all the way with his ass on the ground, basically, and he's still as tall as me. And he's looking at me, and I'm standing there. Susha has taken off. She's gone now. I just realized that she's not by me any longer. Thank you, Susha. And as soon as that happened, we size each other up a little bit, and then this Bigfoot starts moving to my right down the hill towards the beach, and that's why I'm assuming that it was on all fours the whole time, because my light was following the eye shine. So he was going down to the ground and moving along spider-like, and then standing completely back up again. So my light's going from 2-3 feet off the ground back up to 8, 9, 10 feet up in the air in this motion like a roller coaster, and it's moving away from me the whole time. This thing's keeping its eye on me. And quiet as a bug. I don't recall ever hearing there's brush on, ground cover there. It didn't make a sound. And I'm still standing my ground as long as I can see it. And it finally goes over the hill and out of sight. And I panicked. At that moment, I thought maybe it's trying to sneak up behind me and grab me. I didn't know. I couldn't see it any longer, which was worse, actually, than having it in my view. At least I knew where it was. And I went from my fire pit to my tent. Lickety split, buddy. I dove into my tent, had my sleeping bag in there, left my pad outside by the fire, grabbed my sleeping bag like a child and covered up my head and laid in my tent on my elbows and knees. It hyperventilating what I just seen. I didn't hear Susha. Susha's disappeared. And I'm staying like that, thinking at any second he's just going to grab my whole tent and take me away. I didn't alert my friend Steve or Nancy. I could hear my friend Steve snoring. He and woke him up. And like I told Jeremiah, the next thing I fall asleep. I just fall asleep. It'd been a long day, but I just saw my second Bigfoot. You'd think that would keep a guy up. But no, I fell asleep and woke up maybe 2-3 hours later, I guess. It was still way dark and quiet. And I sat up in my tent and I could hear something outside and immediately realized I could hear by the panting it was Susha. She was pacing back and forth out in front of our tents, and I called her in to my tent, zipped it up, and she laid down with me, and I felt like I would be okay and went back to sleep, but woke up right at daylight. So I didn't sleep a whole lot, but I did sleep. I mean, that's one of the things that just kind of still makes me wonder how I was able to get to sleep. Maybe it was a, self-preservation response to the terror I just witnessed. But
that's like a common thing, even with UFO stuff and paranormal experiences, that people have this like shocking experience and then they go right to sleep after. Like it's weird.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is about the mind. I don't know if it's something to do with wherever these things are, because there's definitely a lot of theories on what these things are and where they're coming from. But yeah, it seems to be a really, really common element that people have like a really bizarre experience. Maybe it's like the mind shutting down and having to restart, but it's surprising how many people are able to just go to sleep after an extremely off the wall experience.
Yeah, some type of auto response that, some innate behavior that I had never experienced before, but
I wonder if it's the brain trying to rationalize. Like if you go to sleep right after the experience, like maybe your brain's hoping that it'll like associate it as like part of a dream or something. But yeah, super weird.
Since I've shared that part of the encounter, I've heard other people with the same response. Oh, I'm not surprised. That happened to me, after a car wreck that I witnessed or was involved in, or something traumatic event. So anyway, I wake up right at daylight and plenty light enough to see. I get out of my tent and I went right to the fire ring. They're down into camp and looking around a little bit. First, I wanted to find that stick that it had broke. Again, no footprints because of the fir needle, ground cover was not good for any of that. I kind of looked at the tree it was standing around, thinking maybe a tuft of hair or something. So anyway, I get the fire going, got coffee going on my fire. My friend Sean sees me milling around, and comes up from the beach with his coffee cup to have a cup of coffee with me, and I immediately told him what had happened. He looked around with me. He had never seen a Bigfoot, was a believer, and was like, no way, on the island? I'm like, yeah, I thought we were safe out here from everything, but, a couple deer, I know bears sometimes swim out there, but I'd never seen one. Anyway, he was amazed.
Well, not a perfect spot for Sasquatch. I mean, it seems like a lot of the time people end up having sightings of them off of these like little random islands that are right off of like the mainland. I mean, most of the time, people aren't going to these spots. Like I'm sure they're utilizing these spots that there's a small deer population and realistically very small to little numbers of people. So, I mean, if you're going to have an encounter anywhere, what not a perfect spot, especially considering that, swimming seems to be within the realm of possibility of these things.
Well, obviously it swam out there. It had to have.
My association is if people can do it, I don't understand why these things wouldn't be able to,
Sure. I know it didn't take a boat, The only other time that island is accessible by foot is in the winter when they draw the reservoir down, January, February, and then they start filling it up again. I don't think there's enough food on that island to sustain a Bigfoot for that amount of time. This is into July now. So I think it had swam out there and was either living on the island briefly, or maybe that night had noticed that there were people camping there and swam out that evening. We stayed the 3rd of July, and I was there for my birthday. I believe we came home on the evening of the 4th of July. So it didn't scare me away. My friends were willing to stay. They didn't say anything, but believe me. So my friend Sean had a friend of his come along that year that I had never met. Him and his wife and their 2 kids were there in their ski boat. They'd come out to camp with us. And we were telling him about what had happened to me. And later in the day, he decided he was going to pack up and leave. And I was disappointed, and Sean was, that they were, leaving. And he told us, Sean and I, in confidence, that he'd had an experience at a Boy Scout camp up near Big Meadows Road, not too far from where we were, when he was a kid. And his scoutmaster, not him personally, had the experience. His scoutmaster had seen a Bigfoot, and canceled the camp 2 days into a week-long camp. Pulled stakes on everything, and all the kids had to go home. And he said that he wasn't willing to risk, his children being in danger because of what I'd seen. And we tried to convince him otherwise, but no, he hightailed it out of there. So, again, when I had my arm extended with the little light after it stepped out from behind the tree, I was about 10 feet from it when I first saw it. By the time I stepped over the fire ring and it came out from behind the tree, I was 5-6 feet from the end of from my hand to the nose of this thing. And it could have just absolutely grabbed me and shook me like a rattle. But never made it. He or she, I don't know if it was a male or female, never made a sound or any sign of aggression towards me. Just squatted down and stared at me and said, "Okay, I see what you are," and moved away down the hill. That was it.
So I know a lot of people, after they have sightings, it's, they'll be horrified of going into the woods. They won't want to go into the woods for whatever set amount of time. But with some of your experiences, it seems like these things have gotten so close to you, or they have the opportunity to actually do something, but they haven't actually taken that opportunity to actually do anything aggressive, for example. So, with having these experiences where you've come very, very close, but they haven't taken that opportunity to do it, has it kind of led you into being like more curious, I guess, than scared of these things? Because, they clearly have had the ability to do it and they haven't chose to do that. So it seems like, at least, in the area that you're in, they don't seem to have like an aggressive mentality, but more so like a curious mentality. But yeah, is that kind of like correlated with you, where it's kind of played into more of like your curiosity also, that you're not scared of these things because, it doesn't appear like they have any aggression towards you?
Yeah, that's very, very well said. I agree. No, I'm still more afraid of bears and cougars than I am Bigfoot. And, like I said, I've rarely seen a bear in Oregon and never had a close encounter with a bear in Oregon or a cougar. I hear stories about them, but attacks are rare. The black bears in Oregon are like, people describe them as, kind of curious dogs. They've never really posed a problem here. But if you go up to Alaska, there's more black bear attacks up in Alaska. Back east, you hear about them more in, Tennessee, Kentucky. Back that way, I think that Bigfoot is similar in, depending on what area you're in, there's different kind of characteristics that they attend to. I know that we've heard about killer Bigfoot in Alaska and people going missing. Well, the same's true here in Oregon. A lot of people go missing and are never found, especially hunters, for whatever reason. But I'm not marking it off as a Bigfoot encounter. Like I said, there's accidents that happen, hypothermia, animal attacks, whatever. It didn't change my love for the outdoors, or it didn't make me, it wasn't something that I thought about consciously ever, really. From that time on, I just continued to do my thing and camp and fish, and kind of hoping I'd have another encounter if it turned out as well as the first two. But then I have not. That was in 1995. So
Hold that thought. We'll be right back after this brief commercial break. And now back to that deep conversation you crave.
It seems like statistically speaking, like Oregon, I mean, of course, you're going to have your more aggressive encounters, but statistically speaking, it seems like Oregon/Washington Sasquatch seems to be more curious than anything. But of course, you have to take any family group with a grain of salt, because you never know how one might interact differently, how they might be feeling on a particular day. But overall, it seems like they're less aggressive in that area. But, some of the people that do go missing, it seems like these things might have the ability to read intentions. And I don't necessarily mean that in like a woo-woo way, like they're a mind reader or anything like that. I more so mean it in the sense of like dogs, for example. If somebody comes into a room and they just have this like sketchy ambiance about them, or there's something off about them, dogs are able to like see past that and be able to read them. So I feel like these things might have somewhat of these same similar abilities where, if somebody's out in the woods, they can kind of read intentions in the aspect of if they're going to be a threat or if they're not going to be a threat. So of course, if you have somebody in a high pressure situation and they're not showing any signs of aggression, then of course there's not going to be any signs of aggression back. But, there are probably going to be some of these cases where, when they're trying to do the little stone pebble rock throwing, trying to scare people off, there might be that big bad guy who likes to try to, take a couple shots out into the woods. And, when they deal with an aggressive encounter back, of course, they're probably going to act a little bit differently because they can read the intention of this person isn't trying to just be scared and get away, but rather they're trying to come at them and face them head on. So it's either deal with the situation or they're under threat, Yeah,
I would, I totally agree. That's very accurate. I'd hate to actually injure one and find out the hard way what its reaction would be to the aggression I just showed it. That would be crazy. And who could blame one for acting that way if it was, hurt by a person? And there's people we've heard about people that have taken action against them, and I don't think it would ever turn out well.
Yeah, I feel like firearms have been around long enough that they full well know what these things are. And if somebody has a gun, like I said, I think they can read the intentions of people on whether or not somebody has it for protection or if somebody has it that they're going to try to shoot at every single possible thing that crosses their sights. Because those people that have the intention of going out in the woods and basically just shooting at anything that they possibly can, they have a different way that they carry themselves. And I'm sure that these Sasquatch beings can read that, and they definitely see that as a threat, that they know that this person, if they see anything off in the distance, their first reaction is going to be they're going to chase off after it. And, if they fall into that situation, I mean, just like anybody that's in that situation, you're always going to come first when it comes to a battle between you and somebody else. Like, you're always going to cover your own ass first. So, if you're in that situation where somebody's running at you, as much as you don't want to do it, as much as it might possibly draw attention to you, it's either deal with the situation or there's might be some other damage to your family unit.
Yeah, I've heard plenty, no, not plenty, but a few stories of guys with dogs that have taken off, aggressively towards a Sasquatch and been killed. And again, who could blame that Bigfoot for acting in defense? If a dog's trying to bite it or acting aggressively, they're going to take action. But luckily for Susha, she decided this thing was way too big and it was not a deer. She was going to take off and just let things unfold without her being in camp. And I can't blame her, but that was the only time ever that I saw that dog react like that. I went backpacking with that same guy, Steve, and that dog in Jefferson Wilderness. We like to compass hike and fish lakes that were off trail. And the first little lake we camped at one trip, she caught sight of a deer on the other side of the lake before dark and was gone for damn near 2 days. And we hadn't even planned on staying there that long, but wanted to until she returned. And she finally came back, had a few cuts and scrapes on her, and pitchy. Her fur was covered in pitch on one side, like she'd slept in something pitchy, but otherwise had a smile on her face, But it was the deer that triggered her reaction, and that was her favorite thing to do. She had no interest in acting aggressively towards that Bigfoot. She knew she'd met her match, I guess.
I mean, I'm sure that Sasquatch or dogs, when it comes to dealing with these things, their first reactions are going to run off on anything that has any type of smell or anything that possibly interests them. But it seems like a lot of the time, as soon as dogs come head to head with the Sasquatch, they quickly realize that they're outmatched and they end up taking off back towards the car. Like, I've heard of a bunch of different stories of like coon hunters, different people that are, just have their dogs out in the woods, and they'll come face to face with these things. And, next thing they know, their dog's under the car and they can't get their dog out from under the car.
Yeah, right. They're smart. They know. So I wanted to add something else Bigfoot related that happened to me before we move on. I know this is getting quite lengthy in time that we've been together here, but
yeah, if we don't end up getting to the UFO stuff too, we can always do it as a round two. I always like an extra excuse to be able to chat with somebody again. So
yeah, okay. So on a trip into Waldo Lake Wilderness, a group of 5, me and 4 other friends, had gone into Waldo Lake Wilderness, southeast of Oak Ridge, which is a hot spot, as you know, for Bigfoot activity, on a backpack trip, Memorial Day weekend back in the 90s. I guess it was prior to my 95 encounter. So 92 or 3, before the fire that was swept through there. We'd planned on staying 5 nights. All of us avid trout fishermen. We ended up at this lake called Harvey Lake. You can look at it on your Google map. Right now, it's easy to see what I'm about to describe if you go in Google and check out Harvey Lake, because you can see the little butte or little hill knob behind the lake that I'm about to tell you about. We were camped at the lake. Fishing was kind of crummy, so my friend Sean, the same guy that was with me on the island at Detroit, him and I and my friend Bruno, we went behind the lake and climbed this little butte to get a view from the top. It was maybe a 200-300 foot climb to the top of this rounded off little butte behind the lake. We climb up there, and Sean notices at the edge of the steeper edge of the butte that there's some loose boulders about just hanging there, some shale hanging near the edge of the cliff. And he commissions my friend Bruno and I to go over and sit on the ground, and with our feet, we rock this boulder back and forth. It was probably, 5 feet wide and 4 feet tall, couple 1,000-pound rock that we're trying to push down the hill, right or wrong. We decided that'd be cool to see it roll down the hill and crash through the forest, which is what happened. We get this thing going, and it tips over down and rolls down the hill. It's taken out little trees and bushes as it rolls down the hill, and it went airborne at one point. We were like, wow, we're far out. And finally came to rest at the bottom of the butte, and we mill around for a little bit, and the 3 of us go down to check out the boulder. We get down to the boulder, and it has come to rest on a big fir tree, kind of standing up, leaning on this fir tree. The tree was too big for it to do much damage, and we're admiring how strong we are, and this boulder's laying there, and we're like, okay, that was cool. We went back to camp and did our thing, made a steam sauna that night with a tarp. It was really cool. If you ever done like an Indian, a traditional sauna, hot sauna, steam sauna. Anyway, the next day, same story. We decided we wanted to go back and play around back there. So we go back, and I don't remember who noticed it first, but the same guys, Bruno and Sean and I, we walk up to check out the boulder again, and our mouths are like, our jaws are dropping because this boulder is now about 10, 15 feet up the hill from where it had come to rest against the fir tree. There's no absolute way that this rock tipped over and rolled back uphill that far. We even considered that, but the angle that it was resting against the tree on top of the size of this thing, it was an impossibility. And I still wasn't thinking Bigfoot, but it had to have been maybe a group of them had come and we'd pissed them off or something about being destructive with this, their area, and moved that rock back uphill so we would notice it if we saw it again and either clear out or, abstain from doing anything else like that again. I went back in there with just Bruno years later to check out the damage that the 96 fire had done. And it wiped out everything in that whole area, including all of the trees around Harvey Lake. And of course, we had to see if the boulder was still there. And sure enough, it was still sitting the same way that it was when we saw it the second day. So
that's one of those things that's like, there's no other natural force that can do that. Like, trying to come up with explanations on how that can naturally happen, like, it almost just seems more logical at a certain point to just say, all right, there's Sasquatch out here, and there's nothing else that would have been able to move that like that. Like, yeah. Unexplainable, absolutely unexplainable, other than Sasquatch.
At first, I thought, they must be incredibly powerful if one Sasquatch could move that rock, but it could have been a group of them, like ready and push. And it had been tipped over backwards uphill. And then, you could see by the ground, it had been shoved manually another 4 or 5 feet uphill towards where it had come from. So freaky as hell, bro. It was a very strange feeling.
If you guys were messing with one of their areas too, the same as people, like when you get angry about something, that adrenaline factor kicks in. So, is it possible that their strength that we already know is significantly stronger than ours? They get angry and it probably doubles, triples with their adrenaline rush. They may even be potentially able to pick that thing up or even throw it back up the hill themselves if they're angry enough.
Who knows, right? After that rock got thrown at me in 1979 or that hit the tree, I don't underestimate their abilities one bit.
If they can uproot trees and flip them upside down, think about how much strength it takes to just be able to pull a tree out of the ground. Like, even a little shrub, a lot of the time you end up having to attach that thing to a truck to pull it out because the roots are so gripped into the ground. Like, they'll take full trees and flip these things upside down. Like, I don't think that we have fully even began to understand the strength of these things. Like, a chimp that's half of our height has the ability to take an adult grown human and whip it across the room. Like, bring that to a bigger scale. Like, these things are unfathomably strong.
Yeah, good point. I think that no matter what, it'll take more evidence to validate what we all believe, but we won't be surprised when we find out exactly what they're capable of.
Especially if you actually try to cage one of these things to possibly try to prove his existence. By no means am I one of the people that are going to say, hey, we need to prove it's Sasquatch, so somebody go out there and kill one of them. But, if somebody actually tried to cage one of these things, I feel like that might be when you truly see their full force, because if they have the ability to throw rocks as precise as they can, throw these boulders as precise as they can, I would not be surprised at all if you tried to cage one of these things and they're able to basically just shred and rip that thing apart, especially, again, putting the anger factor behind that.
I don't know if it's possible.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, trying to cage a gorilla is hard enough, but, take something that's double the size of a gorilla, and that's, again, unfathomable.
Yeah, I agree. That's about it as far as my Bigfoot experiences go. I have a couple friends that are avid hunters that have never actually seen one, but have concluded that what they were hearing was Bigfoot in their camp at night. And one in a tree stand during the day that, for some reason, he didn't see a bear or anything else that would have done this, but he saw a cougar make a deer kill from his tree stand, and then was suddenly scared off the kill shortly after it had done this deer in, and went back the next day and walked around where it had happened, and the deer was gone. It was just gone. And usually if cougars make a kill, if another cougar chases it off, they'll come and feed on it and then bury it right where it's laying or drag it a few feet, but he couldn't find any sign of it anywhere, no blood marks or anything. Like whatever came and got it, it just picked it up and shouldered it and carried it off. Could have been another hunter, but highly unlikely in the area that he was hunting. So, I continue to be amazed, and I'm a Bigfoot junkie. I just love watching podcasts and encounters, and some of them I'm like shaking my head within a few minutes into the into the episode. Others I'm just listening to 2 or 3 times because I can relate. I can relate to what's happening.
It's one of those things, you spend enough time in the community and somebody comes in with a story and somebody that's been around for a while. It's like, there's not like a set amount or set rules or calling cards to Sasquatch, but you can always tell the people that are making up a story because there's different mannerisms about them, like the encounters are just different. Like they weed themselves out without realizing it because of course there's the listeners and stuff that just want to hear like the craziest encounters possible, but anybody that's actually had an experience or that really like takes the time to research these experiences, like those stories you can weed out pretty quickly.
I'd like to add that I was brought up in a Christian church, and my dad's policy was "as God is my witness." And he taught me that honesty is always the best policy. I have no reason whatsoever to fabricate anything or make anything up for any reason. I just happen to be in the either right or wrong place at the right time. And these things actually happen to me. People close to me. I haven't really shared that much with my family. In fact, my oldest sister really didn't know that I'd seen a Bigfoot once or twice until recently. She said, maybe you mentioned that back in the day, but I don't remember you ever being very proud of it or walking around like, here I am, look at me, I've seen a Bigfoot. It was just, something else that had happened to me while I was in the wilderness. I've had a few strange things happen to me in the wilderness, not even Bigfoot related. And she was asking me, she reminded me, well, didn't you see something odd in Jefferson Wilderness, some lights or something? Which I did. And she remembered me telling her about that more accurately than the Bigfoot encounters.
It's funny how after a while, like a lot of the time people have their experience and they kind of keep it to themselves. But after they get to a certain point, you start wearing like the Sasquatch guy as like a badge of honor. Like it's almost kind of like the whole idea of like conspiracy theories that originally it was intended to be something derogatory. Like I'm sure the first person who said like, oh, you're just some squatcher, it was intended to be derogatory. But at a certain point, you flip it and you wear it as a badge of honor. Like I love being the Sasquatch guy. And, you may not tell everybody the stories, but as soon as you find people that are interested, it's like, yeah, you don't need to go and tell the people that don't want to hear it. So like, why even waste the breath when you have these people over here that are more than happy to hear the story and they'll actually throw in their thoughts and opinions on it. We're the Sasquatch guy as a badge of honor, and then people will actually end up sharing their stories with you too.
I absolutely agree. I enjoy talking to folks like yourself that have passion for the subject and are, open-minded. Every once in a while, I'll make the mistake of commenting on Facebook, somebody that says, yeah, right, well, that couldn't have happened. Bigfoot isn't really real and you're full of crap. And I'll underneath it, I'll comment, well, was I full of crap in 1995 when I was 10 feet from one? And, every time I push send, I think, why did I do that? Why would I even open myself up? Because minutes later, they're like, yeah, and you believe in Santa Claus and, dragons and all that. I'm like, well, maybe dragons were real too, but I thought Santa Claus was real for a long time, but apparently, who knows?
Some people, there's just no convincing. Like, I've gotten to the point where it's just like, the people that are interested. The people that aren't, you're never going to convince. And the only way those people are ever going to be convinced is if they haven't experienced themselves. But,
Yeah.
I mean, I take their opinions with a grain of salt anyways, because usually the people that have the strongest opinions about Sasquatch not existing, as I mentioned earlier in the show, are the people that don't spend any time out in the woods. Because they're the people that are always trying to tell the hunters who have spent years and years and years out in the woods, that know the difference between a bear and some other creature that, we're calling Sasquatch. They're going to try to tell that guy that you saw a bear. And it's like, no, I don't think that the city boy is going to tell the hunter that they saw a bear, not a Sasquatch. Like, at a certain point, it's kind of like, yeah, you're never going to convince them, but you're never going to convince them because they're never actually spending any time out there.
Sometimes I'm sarcastic in that way. I'll say, in response to a non-believer, I'll say, said Bob from his futon drinking his second bottle of wine in Los Angeles. You've never stepped a foot on a trail or camped once in your life, and you're sitting there telling me that I'm full of crap, and you have no idea what I'm about at all. But okay, that's up to you. First you have to have faith in the person that's telling the story a little bit, and question whether or not they are doing it for notoriety, or if they're just the greatest fabricator that they've ever met, or for what reason would they have to lie about something like this, especially if there's detail and validity through the detail. At least if you don't know who you're talking to give them a little bit of the benefit of the doubt. But I get it. I mean, before I saw my first one in '79, like I said, I wasn't gonna. I remember thinking, if I ever see one or somebody runs one over, maybe then I'll believe. But until then, Bigfoot is just a myth to me. I wanted to believe, but seeing is believing, right? Absolutely.
I mean, even a lot of the hunters who actually have seen these things, like, you'll hear it a lot in the reports that they don't actually even ever really call it like a Sasquatch. They'll just say like, oh, I saw this big ape-like man, or I saw, this big bipedal creature. Like, for me at least, I feel like it brings more validity when people don't actually use like the term Sasquatch, because, they're trying not to add that ambiance to it of like, oh, you just had like a Sasquatch encounter. Like, they're actually trying to get their story across. Like, if they were trying to lie and they were trying to fabricate a story, they'd be making sure they throw in Bigfoot and Sasquatch in there whenever they possibly could. You got to have those key words in there. But if they're purposely trying to dance around using that terminology, like, maybe you should take their encounter with a little bit more validity. Like, give them a little bit more stock right off the bat.
There is one other possible encounter I want to include briefly.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So when I was about 8 years old, my mom and dad and my old middle sister, Nancy, she's 6 years older than me. She would have been 14 or so. We went camping at Delinquent Lake in Eastern Oregon. At that time, it was a very remote area, and dirt road access only. My dad had an old 4-wheel drive Ford, and he loved going where nobody else was fishing. So we ended up at Delinquent Lake one summer, and my mom and dad slept in the canopy of the Ford truck. My sister and I had a little pup tent. We used to call them Army issue pup tent that we slept in. The first night we were there, we'd gone to bed. My mom and dad had crawled in the canopy to sleep, and dad always built up the fire. We were in the campground we were at, ridiculously large, so there would be firelight for us to see from within inside the tent. And so we're in there, and you could see the fire flickering on the walls of the tent. And I don't know how long we'd laid there. I wasn't asleep yet, either was my sister Nancy. and we hear something walking outside the tent, real close to the tent into our campground. And I'm laying on my back, and with my left arm, I hit the wall of the little pup tent to scare it away, just whack. I hit the side of the tent, and it lands on something solid, like I'm slapping the side of a cow or something right outside the tent. But it doesn't scare it away. And no, we don't hear any sound. Usually if you scare a deer away, you hear it jumping away out of camp. So I sit up in bed, and my sister now, she's sitting up in bed, and the fire's still going quite well. And I'm too afraid to look outside the tent, but my sister goes and opens up the flap of the tent and stares out and takes a deep breath and just starts screaming. And I don't know what's going on. I'm thinking it's a bear, because there were actually bear sightings in that campground previously. Not while I was camped there, but my dad had seen black bear there. And I was deathly afraid of bears. I figured that would be my demise that night. He was going to come and eat us. So my sister screams, which wakes up my dad. And I'm going to interject right now. My sister Nancy hardly recalls any of this happening. She doesn't recall what I'm about to tell you, especially. She remembers me hitting the wall of the tent and screaming. But after that, she has very little recollection of what occurred. So anyway, my dad is alerted. We hear the canopy door pop open and the tailgate come crashing down. He had to open up both to get out of the truck. And he comes out over to the tent. And my sister says, there's a hairy man there was a hairy man standing by the fire. And Dad is calming my sister, and now I'm crying because I'm thinking I'm picturing my dad. I was always afraid of right or wrong. When I was that age, I was afraid of bums that we'd see downtown that would drink and approach us when we'd go shopping downtown in Salem, asking for money. And my mom and dad always said, don't ever give them any. Anyway,
mental illness, though, it does get kind of scary. So I'm going to give you that one at least. I mean, coming from somebody near the Detroit area, of course you always want to help people and give people the benefit of the doubt. Like, that's the Christian way. But, at a certain point, some people got themselves in those situations because of some mental illness. So you really do have to kind of watch yourself around some of them.
Well, it was my dad always saying to stay away from them when I was with my mom, and then he'd stay behind and slip them $5. So mad. We need that grocery money. But, and now, the age I am, I give more money to the homeless when I see them than I do at church, honestly. See, with the dog especially. My wife and I are always buying dinners at Safeway and handing them out to whoever's in front. Anyway, so there was a hairy man by the fire, and Dad is calming my sister. I don't remember any more of the conversation that we had that night, but we moved into the truck with my parents. I slept on the bench seat in the front of the truck, and my sister cozied in with my parents, and we made it through the night. So the next day I wake up, I'm still in the truck, and I look outside, and Dad's packing everything up. He's taking the little pup tent down and all the cooler, everything's getting ready to leave. And I get out of bed, and he told me, he said, I don't think that we hadn't even fished yet. I don't think the fishing's too good here. We're going to leave. But the one thing I remember is Dad had a 5-round Colt 45 long barrel pistol with a pearl handle that he kept under the front seat of the truck. And he had that thing in his holster on his belt while he was packing up the camp. I had never seen my dad open carry on any camping trip for that matter. And he was very quiet and reserved. And that's what we did. We packed up and drove to Walton Lake that afternoon, where there was hardly a campsite to be found. It was packed with people, and we had a great time there. I remember the fishing wasn't very good, but my dad seemed a lot more relaxed. I believe he got out his whiskey later that day and decided whatever we saw up there. We never went back to Delinquent Lake either. but like I said, it's so curious that my sister and I told her, maybe you need to be hypnotized, Nancy, and tell man. And that was what you said. It was a hairy man. And I asked her, did he have pants on or a shirt or anything? She's like, I don't know. I don't, like doesn't even want to access that part of her memory to well up any memory she has of what she actually saw. But I do know that when she opened that tent, the scream was immediate. So, who knows? It wasn't a bear. I told her, was it a bear standing up? No, it was not a bear. So maybe that was the first sighting, and my dad's reaction. Maybe he knew more than we knew. He was a Forest Service radio tech in Eastern Oregon in John Day when I was young.
Oh, I'm sure he heard some stuff coming over the radio, 100%.
He drove around those back roads in an old Willys Jeep. That was his job every day of the week. And he may have had more encounters than we know about. And back then, who wanted to talk about it? That and or UFOs or anything that was out of the ordinary. Everybody would laugh, maybe fear of being fired or replaced at the job that you're at. So very curious encounter for sure.
I think Sasquatch is one of those things that's just so entwined into human culture that no matter who the person is, like if you're in that situation, you're in the woods and something happens, like it's going to be one of those first things that everybody is going to jump to. Like people say what they want. People say like, oh, I don't believe in Sasquatch. But I think everybody, for whatever reason, inherently, naturally does have a subconscious belief in Sasquatch, because when you're in that situation, that's the first thing your mind's going to go to. And it seems like ghosts and Sasquatch, when people are put under those situations, those are the first things that people are definitely 100% prone to believe in. But I think that that's something way deeper than that. I think that we've been coexisting with these things since the beginning of time. And it's almost like that uncanny valley thing that we subconsciously know they're there. And that's why when these situations happen, it's like, you may not act on it directly out loud, but people instantly are like, yep, this is how I need to act in this situation. Like, it almost seems like there's some type of like inherited, like ancestral memory on how to like deal with these things when you're in the woods. Like I said, people don't want to believe, but I think subconsciously, like everybody like knows something's there and does believe.
Oh, I totally believe that's true for sure. Yeah.
There's just way too much paralleling time. It's kind of like the whole thing with, you see a dark shadow above you in the sky. Like your first natural response is to duck. Like there's these things that are just naturally implanted with us. And if Sasquatch has been around for as long as we've had, and we've had as many interactions with these things for as long as we've had, like there's got to be some type of ancestral memory with these things, which is why like even the most non-believer, you put them in the situation in the woods where there's a slight little tree peak and you'll instantly turn them into a believer, because subconsciously, I think everybody does believe. It's just you deny that you believe.
Well put, brother. I agree.
Hold on tight, guys. This is our last break, so stay tuned. And we are back to the show. Let's hop right in.
Well, I guess kind of starting to wrap up towards the end. I know you don't have any links or anything like that because you're unfortunately not running any pages, even though, your experiences are absolutely fascinating. And I'm sure that there's probably a lot of people who would love to throw some experiences at you.
Thank you.
Before I wrap up completely, I still like to end the show with some words of wisdom. So if there's any words of wisdom you might want to bestow on the listeners, be it somebody possibly out in the woods who have had a Sasquatch experience that they quite don't know how to deal with, what might your words of wisdom be?
Well, I'd like everyone to be able to experience the wilderness, like I have. And if you've never been camping or fishing or backpacking, to let fear keep a person from experiencing the wonders and incredible things you see when you're in the woods, would be a shame. My advice would be to start small and think big. A weekend outing or just a day hike to get things started, and keep expanding your possibilities to the point where you feel comfortable with a backcountry backpack or going into bear country. It's all about taking precautions. I think Bigfoot in general is the least of your worries. You know, if you ask any experienced outdoorsman, a lot of them will say, "Well, it's people I worry about the most," which is probably pretty accurate. And then there's also the dangers of a bear attack or a cougar. Here in Oregon, those are the two biggies. You know, do your homework and practice safety measures to keep yourself out of harm's way. But absolutely, especially for kids, when I retired from my lifelong career as a worker in a production plant, I joined up with a buddy of mine and helped him expand his outdoor school business. A guy named Dan Coyle at coileoutside.com, if you're interested in here in Oregon. And we taught 5 to 10-year-olds wilderness survival skills. And our paradigm for our camps was just that. Put the phone down. Your best day in your life is not going to be how many games you won playing on your phone. It'll be finding a frog on that first time you went on a day hike, or getting your toe bit by a crawdad while you're wading in the lake. You're going to remember those things all your life. And it's important that we keep that going, especially now with the technology and all of the amazing things that we're coming up with computer chips, that we just leave everything behind now and then and go out and roast a hot dog on the fire and sit around it and talk about things that really matter to us. You can always go back to it later, but the more you do it, the more you just decide this is what's real and this is what life is all about, just experiencing nature and the amazing world we live in.
Definitely agree with that. I mean, almost anything in life, there is a fear element to it. Even, taking a car to go somewhere, there's a fear element to it. There's a danger element to it. So you can't let these things get in the way of you truly experiencing life. And especially when it comes to the woods. I mean, like you said, every little small thing ends up creating a memory. You're going to remember that hummingbird you saw. You're going to remember that woodpecker you got to see. You're going to remember that one time that you were trying to cross the creek and your boot got stuck in the mud. But, video games, they're materialistic. Like, they don't really go anywhere. They don't mean anything. They don't really have any real value to them. And we get to a point in this world where we're so wrapped up with technology that we don't realize that humans aren't supposed to live that way. We're not supposed to have this much interference in our lives, as far as like constant notifications going off, constantly having the ability to scroll, constantly having to have something to help people with their constant anxiety, to always have to be fidgeting with something. One of the best things that we need for society as a whole, considering that we've gotten to a point where, mental illness is rampant, people don't have the ability to sit still anymore. We need to drop the stuff that's making us anxious and get back to living how people are intended to live, which is a slow-moving life with small groups of people around you that you truly care about, that you can have these deep conversations with personally, instead of having a million different friends online that you don't truly know. You need to bring it back, smaller fold, and again, understand how people are truly supposed to live, and that we're not supposed to have nearly this much interaction and bombardment in our lives. Like, simplicity is bliss. That's the best way to describe it. And when you get out into the woods, you really realize that simplicity really is bliss. And the same people that, constantly can't sit still and they got to constantly be flipping through videos on their phone will be the same people that once they get out in the woods, they'll realize that they can just sit there, stare at the water flow, or watch the sky for 3 hours straight, just because they don't have that constant thing that's messing with their mind right in front of them.
Yeah. I had one little kid come up at the end of one of our week-long camps, little 8-year-old little guy, little redhead, and he gave me a hug. And he said, "Joey," he said, "you are the greatest human to ever live." And he told me, "I am not going to play Minecraft ever again." I was like, "Well, okay, brother." Thank you.
Hey, you got to get them to notice the little things. I mean, one thing that I've been doing with my kids for a really long time is obviously fungus is really, really fascinating. Just seeing all the different colors, varieties, and all that stuff. And a lot of the time, you got to be paying attention because a lot of the most fascinating ones are these really, really tiny ones. So I started playing a game with my kids where I try to get them to notice like the fine little details and things. So when we go for nature walks, I'll say like, hey, I want you to find me like the smallest frog you could find, or a really interesting small bug you can find, or find the most pretty fungus you could possibly find, or even going to, for example, like an art museum, you know, when you go and you find like the paintings where they're like really, really detailed paintings, you ask them to help you find some of the small, really cool details and things that you don't think other people will notice. And it ends up making a really, really big difference with your kids, or just kids in general, because they actually learn to slow down and appreciate and notice the small things in life instead of just being swept up in this constantly flowing rat race that is life. You know, you got to break them apart, give them that opportunity to actually notice the small, little, subtle, beautiful things in life.
When I was about your age, I had made some life choices that weren't the best, and ended up at a rehabilitation facility for a few weeks to get my mind right. And the last day I was there, I was afforded an hour conversation with a very prominent psychologist in the area. And I told him my story and this and that and the other thing. And at the end of the session, he told me, Joey, here's what I think you need to do. Stop seeking applause. What I want you to do is go to a pond and just sit by it and pick up a leaf and stare at it for about an hour and just realize how lucky you are just to be sitting there staring at that leaf. And it was like one of the best things I'd ever heard. It totally excused me from having to prove anything, that I just needed to start taking part in the life and the world that I lived in without need for excitement, I guess, one way to put it. Just being myself and being okay with being alone.
Oh, yeah, I definitely agree with that. Like I said, taking the time to actually notice the small, little, beautiful things in life that, you know, if you're constantly go, 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 you don't take the time to actually learn and appreciate these things. Like even just simply sitting next to a river, listening to the sound of it flow while you're getting to watch birds chirp off in the distance and you're watching the clouds flow by, like it's just such a beautiful moment, and people just don't take enough time to really appreciate like how wonderful it is that you have the opportunity in life to actually do that. Like
I still do that.
That's what I'm saying, man.
Do that. Yeah.
You'll catch me all the time when I get the opportunity. I'll just sit in the grass and stare at the clouds for a while, because any opportunity that I have to just not go, like I always take those opportunities, man.
Yeah. I'd like to add that for one thing, I've appreciated the time you've afforded with me tonight, and I think your kids, Shayn, are in very good hands. I applaud you for everything, and I'm very impressed with your character and your passion for things that are good. Well done, brother.
Well, I really, really appreciate that, man. Hearing just like little compliments on the show, man, they mean the absolute world to me, because, you know, I try to do the show to try to, bring other people's stories out into the open so other people can actually have like a platform to be able to, you know, get their message out, get their stories out. So it's always weird when the tables get turned, but it's always appreciated. I never quite know how to take a compliment, but it absolutely means the world to me.
Very well. Good job, brother.
And same goes for you, man. I'm really looking forward to next time we get to chat. Really, really enjoyed the conversation. Ended up going for almost 2.5 hours, and I'm sure that I could easily go for another 2.5 hours. And we were just simply diving into Sasquatch, man. I'm curious what we're going to get into next time we get to dive into some of this UFO stuff. And I think we'll have a lot more things to talk about in the future, my friend.
I hope we get that opportunity. I'd love that. Thank you.
If you guys are interested in supporting the show and all of the hard work behind it, don't forget to go and check out the Patreon, with 2 tiers available, ad-free/early access and full access, and a lot of new updates coming very, very soon. And you guys can also go and check out the Bizarre Reality merch store, with t-shirts just $15.68 plus shipping, which equals out to about $20, which would make a perfect holiday gift for anybody out there who might possibly listen to the show. And you guys could also donate to the show directly, which I greatly appreciate, especially around this holiday season. season, trying to give the kids as best of a Christmas as I possibly can. So anything you guys can do, I greatly appreciate. If you guys get value out of the show, anything you want to give back goes a very, very long way. And last but not least, you guys can also go and check out the affiliate links with some additional discounts and credits available for you guys, such as a $10 credit for Sticker Mule if you guys need any t-shirts or stickers or anything like that printed possibly for your business, band, or possibly even podcast. And I know that times are tough out there, especially with the holiday seasons coming up. I can completely understand myself, but if you guys would like to support the show in some other ways, you guys could also go and leave a review for the show anywhere you guys happen to listen to the show. And if I happen to find it, I will read it on the show and of course give you guys a big shout out. And you guys can also go and follow the show on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook. You guys could also share the show through word of mouth with anybody that you think might potentially enjoy the show. Grassroots support is exactly how the show grows, and anything you guys do to help that, I greatly appreciate. And then you guys can also go and catch live shows and check out the video content of the shows. And last but not least, you guys can also go and check out my other show, Bizarre Encounters with Shayn Orin, to possibly have another podcast to get you guys through the work week. And every single thing that I mentioned is all available in the link tree, which is available down in that show description. And with that, hope you guys enjoyed the conversation. Hope today's show has connected some dots in your own reality, and I'll catch you guys on the next one. Have a good night, everybody.
Reality isn't what it seems. Abductees taking aboard a craft with a tractor beam. Is life a simulation or an astral dream? Aliens travel through black holes in different galaxies. Life is a bizarre odyssey. With a mic talking about philosophy. Well, Bigfoot is stalking campers as a Wendigo walks through the woods of sharpened antlers, using a Ouija board to talk to the dead like a necromancer. There's so many questions and not enough answers. So if you're interested in mysteries and abnormalities, tune in and listen to Inquiries of Our Reality. So if you're interested in mysteries and abnormalities, tune in and listen to